Oh my, what a night. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Professor Miller, and I am so honored that you're all here. Let's give it up for all the amazing actors that made the Haunted Tour what it was. Thank you all so much. I gotta be honest, that was the first time we've ever done anything like this before, and I gotta say, it was amazing. So again, thank you so much to everybody who participated, and everyone for coming out. So, listen, I am so honored to be here. Can't see it. Can you turn that back on? I don't know, but can someone turn that light back on? Please?
Anyone there?
Another go.
Where is it?
Thank you. All right. Trying to shut me out of my own presentation. Again, thank you all so much. So I want to share with you a little bit about the film series. First of all, the film series is to benefit the Nightly News Media Club. So all of the donations that you made tonight will go back to the Nightly News. We do some amazing things here on campus. We have an online newspaper, a quarterly publication. We do our sports broadcasts of our men's and women's basketball and baseball on our YouTube channel. And of course, the Nightly News podcast, which we just got teased a little bit. But the film series is very important to us here at Central Penn. This is actually the 29th film series that we've done. And I'm so honored to be here with the group of Nightly News students to bring it to you here tonight. So, what the film series is, it's not usually a haunted tour of the underground. That was a little special. But once a term, we have one of our faculty, our alumni, our students offer their opinions or reflections about favorite movies that they have. And I've had the fine opportunity to do this a few times in the past, and this is one of my absolute favorite movies. Not just scary movies. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about why me and this movie kind of fit together and what impact it's had on my life. So here I am, a communication professor here at Central Penn College. My background is in film and film study. And as I think back of my life and the films that kind of drove me to be here with you tonight, even as a professor here at the college, is a movie like Scream. So, Scream came out in 1996. I would have been 15 years old. Of course, at that time, I was not able to buy a ticket to Scream. So what did I do? Well, I bought a ticket for a PG movie and snuck in. But what was interesting about Scream? Scream had a really slow burn when it came out. It wasn't a big hit. It wasn't a big budget film. And frankly, kind of flew under the radar when it first came out. But if you go back and look at the week by week take, what you saw is it was one of those films, most films today, they hit the first weekend, and then the next weekend it's like half that much. This was the exact opposite. It had a really poor opening weekend and exploded. It was almost like a slow burn. And I remember sneaking in one afternoon, there's no one in the theater, and I got to experience one of the most influential films of my life. So what I want to do is share a little bit with you about it, but more so about why this film is still so culturally relevant even today. So the log line is anytime you see a brief description of the movie, that is what they call a log line. And the log line for this film, and I'm just going to warn you, if you've never seen it, unfortunately there are spoilers here. So for that I apologize, but in fairness, you've had almost 30 years to see it. I think there's like a statute of limitations for that kind of thing, right? A year after the murder of her mother, a teenage girl, Sidney Prescott, is terrorized by a new killer who targets the girl and her friends by using horror films as part of his deadly game. Made with an unheard of $14 million budget. Today, you're not making anything under 25. But made over $173 million worldwide. You want to talk about one of the biggest splashes ever, it was this film. It won some awards, not Academy Awards. A lot of times horror films don't get a lot of love from the Academy, but they did win Best Movie in the MTV Movie Awards, and were nominated for another 22 awards. Gentlemen, on your right here is Wes Craven, and any of you that know anything about horror and the slasher genre knows Wes Craven. What's interesting about this movie is this movie does a really good job of making fun of other horror movies. And interestingly enough, Wes Craven's literally making fun of himself throughout the entire film. So he obviously was known for The Nightmare on Elm Street or The Hills Have Eyes, and he of course is a legend in the horror industry, writing 51 films with 38 directing credits. I want to give you guys a little bit of something to keep an eye out for. Wes is in the movie. He makes a small cameo as the janitor. He's got very long hair. Of course, here his hair is very nice and clean cut. So I want you to keep an eye out for Mr. Craven. Of course, a lot of the stars in the film were either sort of over the hill, quote unquote, or up-and-coming actors or actresses, including established stars like Courtney Cox in really one of her first feature films after Friends. Of course, many people know her from Friends, but even Drew Barrymore. And one, of course, the interesting things about this is she was by far the most well-known actress. She doesn't make it very far into the movie. Spoiler alert. IMDb was actually really nice to the film, giving it a 7.3, which doesn't sound great, but if you know anything about IMDb rankings, anything 7 and up is good. And even Rotten Tomatoes gave it 79%. And a really awesome, there's a lot of reviews on there. One quote that stuck out to me was, when Scream first made its way into theaters, it seemed as if it was just going to be just another horror movie. But it proved everyone wrong, and it has become a beloved franchise, and franchise it is. You want to talk about a franchise, there are 7 Scream films. The 7th is actually coming out next, I believe, early 2026. February 2026 is when the next one's coming out. So you want to talk about a franchise. So the first was sort of a trilogy. The first, the stories from this particular film, which we're watching, was a trilogy, and then they rebooted it in 2011. And actually, the 2011 version is almost as critically acclaimed as the original. There was also even a TV show on MTV, which a lot of people didn't really watch, but I actually enjoyed it myself. It was something I could watch with my daughter, and it was something we could bond over. But you want to talk about something that has had staying power for the last 30 years. Here you go. But that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about the impact that this film had. We're not just showing it because it's Halloween. We're showing it because this is probably the most impactful horror film of many of our lifetimes. It still impacts films even today. Because obviously I think we know that this is part of the horror genre, but the slasher subgenre. So when we're talking about genre in films, there's a handful of genres, but within those you'll find smaller pockets. Like, for instance, zombie films are their own subgenre. Slasher films with, sort of the mass murderers are their own subgenre. So there are different types of films. So this falls into the slasher genre. And here's a couple of aspects of the slasher genre. But what happened was, and this is really interesting to note, why this was so unique is because horror had undergone a really stale period from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s. Of course, Psycho laid the groundwork for the horror as a genre, and films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and everyone's favorite Halloween in the 70s. Of course, the 80s was full with Freddy and Jason, but people started getting sick of these films. I mean, Friday the 13th, there's who knows how many at this point. They were basically cranking a new one out every year, and it got really stale. So the early 90s, the slasher subgenre almost really didn't even exist. And what it did exist with was all retreads until we found Scream. Scream changed the game and revived the slasher film. Now what's interesting about this particular film, which is what we're going to talk about, is this is a film that is self-referential, meaning that it is what we call a meta film. That they know that most films, they don't act like they're in a movie, right? This film does. They know throughout the film that they are in a movie, and they're using the rules, as they call it, or genre conventions, as we might know it as, to navigate the plot of the film. The interesting thing is this really changed horror since then. 30 years later, this film still influences the way that we think about the horror genre. Now, one of the most classic scenes of this film is when Randy goes over the rules of a horror film. Now, I'm not going to go over all of them because I'll let Randy do that when we get into the film. But there are certain rules that you must abide by in order to make it through the film. I thought that this was really cool and the way that they handle this. But what's even more interesting about Scream is the impact that they have had on hundreds of other films. In fact, as I was researching this tonight, there was a list of films inspired by Scream that was over 100 films long, including entire franchise. I mean, just in and of itself, Scary Movie is almost an entire, I don't want to say ripoff, but sort of a parody of Scream. They have, what, 6 or 8 films? But a lot of the other, not only 90s films, but into the 2000s, and then you're not even counting all of the films that have come after the original Scream. So it's amazing the impact that it had. So as I mentioned earlier, Scream is something that we call meta-fiction, which means that it lets people sort of in on the joke, quote unquote. And what happens is that these films become self-referential. This is a film about people who think they're inside of a film and use genre conventions to try to get through it. That's what's really interesting. And of course, there are many references to scary movies. In fact, the whole first bone-chilling 5 minutes of the film is essentially a deranged psychopath giving somebody a scary movie quiz. That's what it is. So, and whether she is able to know the questions is whether she lives. What's interesting was it refers to some of these films quite frequently. In fact, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street are all explicitly referred to, and there's many other ones implicitly referred to as well. When we think about what this means and why this was so unique, it was because it subverted or went against the expectations that we had. If you thought you were going into a slasher movie, you thought you would see one very specific thing, that is not what happened here. And it changed the game in terms of the expectations of the audience. Basically what happens is, when you think of how many times throughout the film you see multiple references to films, it's almost like these people were, very, very interested in films and sort of lived their life through films, which you, again, essentially see throughout the movie. But the whole thing about the film is that many of these kids are film buffs, and they literally were able to make it through the film because of their knowledge of movies. And this has really refined the modern horror industry. Here's just a couple of ways that this film sort of subverted what a lot of people think when it comes to expecting a slasher film. Number one, they reference, mock, and even utilize classic films as part of their conventions in this film. Even the fact that we'll call her the final girl, subverted because she was different than a lot of other female characters that had existed within the slasher genre just a decade prior. If you think of any Jason or Freddy movie, a lot of the female characters in those films were sort of helpless. And this sort of helped reframe what it meant to be a leading lady in a horror movie, especially how the movie ends. We'll leave it at that. Another interesting thing, I want to go back to Drew Barrymore. At the time, yes, Drew is still a big star. But at the time, she was as hot as it could have gotten. Not necessarily look-wise, I'm talking about how her, how much she had been involved in other films. And the fact that she's killed off 5 minutes into the film was just unbelievably unexpected, and frankly sets the tone for the whole film. So for those of you that didn't know, sorry, I had to break the rules there. So when you think about beyond this, I also want you to take a look at the commentary this film has on the media. As someone who teaches about the media in my classes, I think it's very interesting and unique, the critique that they give on popular culture, the critique that they give about how people, and this is pre-social media, I might add, about how people become so obsessed with the media and they almost live through the media instead of living in the world around them. Of course, this is a preview of what we've seen over the last 2 decades, with the way that people are always glued to their phones and don't like to just spend an evening in a same place like we're doing right here. So when you think about it, I want to kind of leave you with this, is this film uses satire. And satire, a lot of us think about as jokes, and often satire can be funny. Here's a situation where satire is gory, because they're essentially throughout the film making fun of the genre they're a part of, and that is satire. And so when we think about why the satire was used, it's almost like this is a big joke by Wes Craven about the industry that he helped to create. So it's kind of has a couple of different pushes and pulls in the way that it goes. I also want to leave you with some themes that you might want to consider. Number one, the killer or killers in this particular film are doing so because of retribution. Their goal is to get back at somebody who perceived did them wrong. So think about that and how often we get involved with committing retribution on people. Now, even after that, these killers have had, their motives vary. It's not the same killers in all the different movies. I don't even want to get into the plots of the future films. But if you do like this film, I do encourage you to watch at least 2 is a good film. There's some mixed reviews out there about 3. And of course, as I mentioned, I want you to look for the commentary and critique on popular culture, which, yes, popular culture has shifted a lot in the last 30 years, but some of the same critiques that were had back during Scream still exist even today. So my friends, I want to leave you with this. First of all, thank you so much for spending your evening here. I am so pleased and honored to be here with you. Thank you so much to all the fine actors who helped contribute to our haunted tour of the Underground this evening, and I really hope that you enjoyed the film tonight. Last call, I will say that we do still have some concessions if you need, but in about 5 minutes we're going to put the concessions away. We might leave a couple bottles of water back there, and we're looking forward to any donations you could possibly give to the Nightly News. There's also cash and Venmo available in the back. We greatly appreciate it as well. Those of you who've already donated, thank you so much. From the Nightly News, we appreciate you. Are we ready?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
We just have a couple of things. We need to move, but we will certainly get started here in just a minute. Okay? Thank you all so much.